We're covering a fascinating book called The Difference by Chris Voss. And we'll be stepping our way through this because it's not necessarily an intuitive process for everybody. The one quote that comes out in his work is, "No is a dynamic you have to master before you can master yes." Chris, and I was just mentioning, Subu was just mentioning that when he was at Columbia that he studied this book. And I'm really glad to hear that. I did not know that people were using this as a textbook there. That's wonderful news. But it is not intuitive to us. The book is excellent. We are through the bulk of the first half of the year. We'll be moving to the financial model intensive in June for the June intensive weekend. We'll be doing the financial model intensive, and then this summer we're going to split the presentation intensive into two pieces. We're going to focus on a day of role playing in this negotiation process. And so what I have in mind, and I haven't gotten this approved by the boss yet, so Deirdre, don't jump on me too hard. She's been off at a family wedding this weekend. But what I have in mind is that we would role play the different roles and the different concepts that he talks about for the way that you negotiate. And we'll talk about basically the first half of the book, and then the complicated part of the book, it's in the second half. And I think then once we get that underway and we understand the negotiating process, then I think the presentation intensive will make more sense, because we frequently get into this thought about, okay, what is the process we're using for the actual presentation itself? And that sometimes causes people to be a bit confused about what is a good approach for their particular business and the audience that they're aiming at. So the points that he makes here is that everything in life is a negotiation. Now that's my phrase, not his, but the point is that it's, and you'll see this in a moment, he talks about negotiation being a communication that seeks results. So it's still part of what we do every day and we need to be able to do, but it's when you're trying to achieve a result, how do you achieve that result? And those that don't know about Chris Voss, he's basically the definer of a new approach to negotiation in high risk situations that he developed as part of his work for the federal government and the FBI years ago. He's since retired, and he's now he has his own business, and he wrote this book. And the book is excellent, by the way. It's an easy read, but it's a deceptive read. Because as you get into the second half of the book, the concepts, all the material is there. And it's very easy to read because his co-author is obviously an entertaining writer. So they've taken all the concepts and made it a bit more on the entertaining side. So it's not quite as easy to tease out exactly what Chris is trying to get across here. And then also, you might fall into the trap of listening to it on Audible, because he has a wonderful voice and he narrates this thing. And I have to tell you, more people tell me, oh, I just love his voice. And you'll fly through the chapters and you think you'll get it. And it does take actually seeing the words and working your way through. So this is a book where you actually have to study it. That's why we're going to use an intensive process to get through it, so that you don't have to take the time and study it like I do for days to get it down to these core thoughts. And what we'll do is we'll step through about half of this through his key ideas. And then, as I said, we'll cover the rest of it in the next intensive we do this summer that covers this negotiation. But his point is about this. It's communication with results. And there's a subtlety here. And we're always told, try to make the problem someone else's problem. But he does it through what he calls calibrated questions. And there's a whole chapter on calibrated questions near the end. But he uses questions and the technique of questioning to change the dynamic from you owning the problem, reacting to the request, to actually turning it around to ask the other person to tell you how they expect you to solve that problem. And it's a very interesting psychological approach that takes you off the hot seat. And so it would be an example might be, instead of me reacting to Deirdre saying, Tom, I'd like you to do this by tomorrow. And Deirdre knows I'm running at about 25% and I'll be done with, chemo in a couple of weeks, or hopefully next Wednesday. That will flip this. And instead of me just saying to Deirdre, how do you, I can't do that. I just don't have the energy, right? So I don't do that. I say, Deirdre, how would you expect me to do this? So notice how instead of me reacting, that was me reacting, which was she's waiting for me to tell her, what can I do, right? I flipped it around by throwing the problem her way. And instead of me saying, Deirdre, I can't do that, which would be what I would normally say. And I'd probably say it that way to her too. But I flipped it around by saying, Deirdre, how would you expect me to do that? And then he'll get into the point about saying, well, the point I just made to you, I'm running at about 25% of my normal capacity. Hopefully that'll solve itself over the next year. But the question is, how do I flip it like that? I did it in a very ugly way. He will do it. He does it in a much more sophisticated way and teaches you how to create that calibration in your questions. And in that process, he's looking for what is the weakness I'm picking up on the other side? What are they telling me through the way they're responding to me? Now, the other thing I will tell you, and these are my reactions into his idea here, this takes time. You have to actually put yourself in that mindset. And that's what I mean about me. I don't like to give other people problems. It's just not my nature. And I know, Jake, you might quarrel on that one because we, right? And Subu, you may also. I try not to when it's not necessary, right? But you understand the point. I don't, because I come from a history, and many of you do too. It's your job to solve, right? But in a negotiation, especially the really high stakes, you have to see if you could not have. It's his thought, and he's pretty convincing that you doing this helps keep you in a position of strength in what you're dealing with here. But I will tell you, it's clear it takes time. It takes thought on your process planning and patience. And then you have to find a way to make the conditions work. In his case, as Deirdre was mentioning to me again this morning, he was dealing with people that were being held hostage. So this is not a case of where he's got all the time in the world. Yet sometimes these negotiations went on for not just days, but weeks. And we'll get into what are the issues that will tell you that you're at a critical point when you're the one like he was trying to judge. He's got a very dangerous situation. How does he judge whether the level of danger? But then like I said here, it's up to you to make those conditions work for the situation. And again, this is another concept, active listening. And again, you can be tricked into this because you think, well, I've been told this all my life. I need to listen intently. I need to listen first and talk second. His idea is slightly different here. It is that you use two different techniques. One is called mirroring and the other is called silences. Mirroring is where I would respond back to you with what you just said. So Deirdre said, well, what else do you have to do? She's got a good point. I haven't left this room in a long time, right? I mean, that she's got a point. But my reaction, instead of being defensive, which I might be, right, which is, yeah, well, I haven't left this room since January. Actually, I did. I got out finally on Thursday and Friday, but it almost killed me. I had a great time, though. It's with some buddies. But the point is that instead of reacting that way, what I say is, so Deirdre, what you're saying to me is that I don't have anything else to do. That's your thought? Yes. Now, what did I do? I slowed things down. His point is you need to slow the discussion down because you need to, and he talks a late night DJ voice, and I just knowing the generation that you all are in, that probably means nothing to you. But this is that mellifluous, deep, rich voice that radio announcers typically had, that was slow and comforting and the kind of things that you would expect to hear overnight for radio announcers. We don't have that kind of thing much anymore. But he actually has one of these voices. That's why don't listen to him on audio. Do, because it's really great. But you can get mesmerized by the voice. So there's no doubt that a voice matters here. But he's slowing things down and he's using a calming voice. What he means by late night DJ is not necessarily that you have the tone, not necessarily you have the timbre, you have the frequency that's low and pitched, but that you use a more calming approach to dealing with it. So you're reducing the level of tension that might exist. What you're looking for is the difference between the needs and the wants, right? The what do they actually need versus what do they want? And staying focused on what they are saying and what are you learning by what they're saying back to you. And that if you let the conversation get going too far too fast, you miss that opportunity to pick up what is in fact that underlying message, that hidden message that you're missing here. He also uses the technique called labeling, which is to find a shorthand for what someone's telling you. And in this particular case, it's to read their perspective back to them. So in this case, I'm labeling it that, and I'm going to use a really bad label, that I have all the time in the world because I can't do anything else, right? So now I've given it a bad label because I give it 6 different words, right? But I don't have a time constraint. So what I'd say to Deirdre back is I'd say, so you're saying that I don't have anything else to do, right? So I'm coming back and just labeling it now that I don't have a time constraint. And I might actually keep narrowing that down and finally come to that I don't have a time constraint. I don't have a deadline. I don't have anything else that's going to take up my time. I've given you a very ugly example, but you get the idea. I shorthand that thing she's telling me because his point is that message that she gave to me, you don't have anything else to do, that sends a signal. She's assuming I don't have anything else to do. That's a major part of what she's assuming here. By the way, I've never heard that out of Deirdre's mouth. I doubt I ever would. But you all know Deirdre well. You know that that's the case.
You're painting a very poor picture of Professor.
Yes. Okay, Jake. Well, that's a good point. That is a good point.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, yeah. We all know you love Professor Deirdre.
I
So
know. But so the accusation audit is a really interesting thing. Now, what he means by that is that you're auditing their view of you. Okay. So this isn't, I'm going to take and do an accusation audit against Subu, right? No, that's not it. It's you're looking for what is that accusation they're making to you, right? And it may not be visible, but maybe the underlying accusation, I'm wasting time, right? That could be the underlying accusation. And so I can, and so that caused her to react by saying to me, you don't have anything else to do, right? So she's, that underlying thing is, well, you'd be just wasting your time anyway, because you don't do anything else. I don't see anything that tells me you do anything but sit there and listen to music. So the point is, as you know, Deirdre, I'm trying to get to the bottom of this particular issue. So I'm spending a lot of time researching these days. So you disarm, you create, you pick out what you think that underlying accusation is, and you identify it, and you feed back what that is. So I'm stating out loud that it would appear that I'm wasting time, but I'm not, because we've been both talking about the fact I needed to get to the bottom of this other problem that we're going to be dealing with in June. And so I'm spending all my time researching that. I made really good progress there. It's a way of taking, again, seeing what you think is coming at you. So what you're finding here, you could be very easily entranced by listening to this and saying, if you don't think about this and if you don't read carefully what he's talking about here, you miss these points. But the accusation audit, again, if you don't slow it down and use the mirroring approach to slow it down, you won't have time to get this into your head and see it coming. The whole idea is that you're trying to take away negative dynamics, meaning dynamics that are negative to you in the negotiation. They think they can leverage that. It also kind of puts you on equal footing, right? I'm not, I mean, I'm assuming that is true. I'm not trying to make a judgment there. I'm really more focused on the top pieces because I think they're really critical ideas. So, summarizing and paraphrasing and using the word no. So, before I get into this, let's stop for a second and talk about those first three. Because the first one is this point about everything in life is a negotiation. And that you're really, this is all about communication, which we do on a regular basis, but it's looking for a result in a communication. It's about using the technique of mirroring and then silences. Now, one of the points, I didn't talk about silences, but his point here is 15 seconds. That's what you need. Just let it go for 15 seconds and don't do anything at strategic times in the discussion. Just let it go. And that silence many times will provoke them to give you the elements you need for being able to see their perspective, and especially if it has an underlying accusation that's not, because Deirdre didn't say right away, well, you're just wasting time. She said, well, you don't have anything else to do. So you're looking for that subtle message underneath that you can then pull out as an accusation audit and put them on the defensive, because you're now, you what they thought was going to be a strength, you now made into, you didn't care. You brought it out into the open. So tell me what you think about these three. Do these three make sense to you all? Are they things that you think you could actually use?
Hey, Professor, Subbu here. This is like something that I run into every day with day-to-day work at client side or with my leadership team and everyone. And especially like for me personally, the second one around slowing down did personally help a lot. As you could know me, like whoever got to know me like for a long time, I'm a kind of a person who speak at the pace of my mind, and I kind of talk fast, and I kind of like go really fast at the pace of my mind. And at times when I want to really communicate ideas, slowing it down gives me the confidence and also gives me the time to kind of take a step back and understand what the other person is thinking about it in terms of the problem and like the situation it is. So slowing it down, I have seen it personally helping a lot. But at times getting into that unconscious bias of keeping it fast, right? That kind of happens at times, but slowing it down really helps. But one thing which I really found it interesting is that concept of mirroring. I apparently have a my senior manager in my team who currently doesn't have a really great relationship with the client, and it's kind of like really getting into a heated conversation every time. And what I noticed is the senior manager uses the principle of mirroring too often as it becomes like a sword now, where every time there's a conversation, he repeats, let me understand what I understand, and like he repeats, go back, go back, go back. And it has become more from the fact that to a next third key point of labeling or acquisition audit, at times it kind of blows out in a way where the sometimes it's picking up the wrong rationale behind what the other person is saying, and because it's speaking out loud, it kind of like the mirroring and combination of speaking out loud turned out wild at times. So that made me really interesting of like, okay, so the mirroring is great, speaking out loud to on acquisition audit is also great, but there needs to be some sort of a balance on reading the mind of the person on when to stop than doing it very often.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's what the mirroring is meant to summarize at a certain point in the discussion. So it's and the point you're making is a really good one, Subbu. It is that these techniques are not to be brought out like playing cards where you just play them constantly. They're meant to be used almost like that. Well, playing cards is probably a good example. You can only play it once during the discussion. That's probably similar. I think mirroring and silences, those are meant to be strategic techniques you're using. One, to make sure that you are focused on what the key points that are being verbalized are. And then secondly, that you're slowing down the discussion. And so, I mean, I will use it, and I know you all know this because you hear me say this at times. I'll use it to clarify, just to make sure I am understanding what you're saying. And that, I think that's a really important technique to use just in general communication. That's not quite what he's talking about. So yes, I think that will drive you absolutely crazy, because I do know people that do that to excess. All of these techniques, and this is a really good point that you're making about the subtlety of this. I think even when we start talking about no, the use of the term, the word no, it's, I believe, based on what I've read and see, that it is a strategic use of those terms, not a common use of that. You know, Deirdre, I don't know if you have some thoughts on that, or Nahid, you obviously have your thoughts too. So,
Yes, my thoughts are about this whole thing are a little more universal. Actually, Nahid raised her hands, and I think on this point, maybe we'll ask Nahid to talk right now.
Let me lower my hand first. The key idea number 4 and the use of the word no, to me, I'm trying to understand it because sometimes using the word no turns people off, like,
Mhm.
and it's not positive. And that's the way I look at it. And that's what I was taught, and maybe completely I'm wrong and I was taught wrong. But maybe the way you are saying no, I don't know. I need to understand better regarding use of no.
Yes, we'll spend a few minutes in a minute on no. Because I think there, again, just like this, it takes a little bit of subtle turn on the use of the term no. And I think my reaction is exactly yours, because I think of it as being an unproductive path to head. But that's not how he's talking about the use of it. So
Yeah,
hold a little bit on that, and we'll spend some time on that. Do you have some thoughts on, the active listening and the labeling itself? Any ideas, any thoughts on that, Nahid?
I'm agreeing with all of those. Active listening, that's sort of the rest is fine. The use of the term no is sort of like, that's
Yep.
a question I have.
Yes, we'll come back to that. So
Okay.
Amit, I see you've raised your hand.
Hi, Professor. Good to see you. Good to see you all.
You too.
For me personally, I have learned over the course of speaking to thick-headed people, people that listen, and basically people that are walls. I always notice that they come to the table with their solution and what they want in mind. So what I've tried to do is not to go to the table with what I want, because think, the minute I enter a room or a discussion, knowing what I want, I kind of find myself tuning out and not listening to what they're saying, because I'm always looking to hear those words that suit my need. And if they don't say those things, the conversation just goes in all different directions. So I try to just listen. Uh, Even knowing that we may not have a solution or come to an agreement or any kind of close to an agreement today, but just listening. And then I try to, it's difficult, it's really difficult to do, but I try to probe and understand why they want what they want. And in many cases, many cases, well, there are cases that it's absolutely unreasonable, so you just have to put a hard line. But in many of the cases, I have experienced that they are just in the same boat as I am, and by serving them, they are serving me. So for me, it's been a journey to tune myself to listen, and listen with an open mind and no preconceived notion or no solution or any of that. It's just listening and listening. And at the end of it, probing as to, why do you want what you want? Or why are you saying that you're saying this? Just peel it a few more layers. And usually we both arrive at a mutual, like, yeah, well, let's just do that. And that serves all of us. So for me, that has worked a lot at my job, given the different dynamics that I have to deal with on a daily basis, not just my staff, but my peers and even my executive management.
I think there's real value in that, because sometimes if you don't enter something with an open enough mind, you miss the opportunity. that's there. Because you, as you said, you have a preconceived notion of the conditions and what you think the best answer for you is under those conditions. And you don't really have a sense of all the conditions. And what Voss is getting at, I believe, are two pieces. One is using techniques that will elucidate those conditions on the other side, that give you a better view of what possible solutions could be there. And then from there, as this process unfolds, shaping what you want out of it. Because when you came up, Amit, your point is, when you came up, if you predefined an outcome, you were assuming a set of conditions. And what he's saying is, put yourself in the other situation, in that situation of exploring the conditions on the other side, and use techniques to expose that at the base level. And at the same time, using those techniques to shape their view of what your conditions are. That's what these techniques are meant to do, I believe. Because I think, Amit, you've perceived this properly, that his view of negotiation is not that I decide what I want. I enter a situation and I try to drive that answer home. I think his view is slightly different. It is your view, which is, let me figure out what that other side, what the conditions are that they are dealing with. And then once I see that, I can better shape what I want. And then also I'm picking up the leverage points of that situation that would allow me to better shape it to my need. Am I making sense to you, Amit? Is that what you're also saying in this?
That is exactly, yes, that is exactly it. And I always look at it as a tango dance with the person sitting, and it's not a one-way thing. It's a mutual communication, and all of these techniques of mirroring, silencing, being quiet, and stepping away, it's all a subtle combination depending on the situation, and reading the other individual's cues, facial cues, body cues. There's so much to that. And I think that's one of the reasons some of the most important negotiations happen face to face versus over a blank screen with a name, because all you can derive from a blank screen is the voice, and that's about it. But that also, I think, Chris, in his example where he was doing the hostage negotiation, and he was on a line with the terrorist or whoever it was. I think that's I think where he usually uses his example. I saw some of his YouTube videos, but for me, it has always worked to be in person. I can pick up the energy of the individual. And I can sense that you can just, your body just tells you that this person is either being really stubborn and then you shift gears, or the person is willing to dance with you to get to that good point.
Yes. So in the book, he mentions that body language and body messages are really important. The problem is, in his line of work, I doubt that you could do much negotiation in person. But he does mention that is another aspect that is important for you to be able to read, for the points you just made. And I love the analogy of a tango dance, because that makes very good sense in the way that he's talking about this thing. Deirdre, you had some thoughts on your side.
I'd like to drop something in right here. And I know most of you know that I've been running my own consulting business for about 20 years now. And I've done a lot of work with women's business groups and women clients. And one of the issues that women have particularly, or rather I should say, it's been labeled as a problem for women, although I think it's a problem for everyone, is the whole concept of almost feeling that you need permission to enter any sort of negotiation, that it's very easy to see yourself in a position of no power, and that you have to accept, you have to give in, you have to figure out how to make what the other side wants something that is good. And certainly in things like hostage negotiations or even things like talking with a child's teacher and so forth, there's an instinctive protective measure that puts you in a lesser position of power. So what I want to get at here is we've been talking a lot over the past weeks about the mindset of a leader, that you almost have to, even before you start to use the techniques that he's talking about, build in yourself the mindset of a negotiator. You give yourself permission, you see yourself as equal, you see yourself as coming to a result that it's not just that you can live with, but that actively leads to what you want, which is why when Amit started talking, I was saying, yes, he's got it. Yes, he has the mindset here. But this is so difficult for so many people. And so many people would regard these key ideas as tricks. And they're not tricks. They're not things you use one time and then forget about. They are techniques that you need to learn and build into a mindset that you know how to operate. It's not that it's almost unfortunate that he had to break these down into separate chapters, because these are things that instinctively, by the time he gets to the position of lead negotiator at the FBI, instinctively knows all of these things and knows how to move from one to the other very quickly. And that comes from the practice, developing a mindset, developing your instincts about the whole thing. One other point I want to make before allowing you to go on, Professor Cowan, is that later in the book, he talks about the types of personalities. He talks about the analyst, he talks about someone who wants to get along, and he talks about the assertive person. And the assertive person is what many people feel they have to do in reaction to, say, a situation Amit just set out, or a hostage situation where you have to assert back. You have to say, that's what you want, that's not what I want, this is what I want. And then you're butting heads against someone. And while, yes, you have to know what you want, know an acceptable outcome, and you have to be prepared to fight for that outcome, your position is nowhere necessarily as solid as the opposing one, that this is part of the negotiation. You have to know your musts, know where you'll give in, and have the mindset to be able to approach each of these things as the situation unfolds. That's what I wanted to set out right now, Professor Cowan, that this is a lot of mindset issue. This is something that the literature has acknowledged that a lot of people have significant problems with. And they've flagged women, but I know teaching our students and working with our students in their presentations to investors, a lot of our students across all demographics have significant problems in the idea that, oh, the venture capitalist said no, so that's it, without knowing that they can start to ask questions and start to get the information they need to then move forward. So I'll stop at this point, and I've started to address what Nahid was talking about, that a no allows you to start to ask questions to change the situation, and say that that's all part of the mindset. And now I'll allow you, Tom, Professor Cowan, to go forward.
Yes, I want to deal with this term no. So what he's talking about here, to your point, Nahid, it's that what you're seeking ultimately is for them to say no. Because that tells you you've now reached the bottom. So your saying no is saying, you know, you've reached my limit, and you do it right away. You don't wait to do that. And you don't use yes, you don't use maybe. It's a wonderful example, Nahid, in the book. And I really encourage you to read the book, and especially the last, starting with no and going. You've got the first part. But this is where he says, how many times have you gotten something like this? You get a phone call from a telemarketer, and the first thing out of their mouth is to look for you to say yes. And they say, do you like fresh, clean water to drink? Do you like fresh, clean, cold water to drink? They're getting you down a path to say yes, so that you're going to have the hard time coming up with the no. And when you say maybe, you're letting them head down that path, just like you would if you said yes. But his point is, what if you say no, right? And you say to me, you say, do you like to drink fresh, clean water? And I go, nope. And I say it with a little bit of humor. Nope. And you go, do you like fresh, clean, cold? Notice right away, I've thrown you up, because they don't get many people to say no to that. And then I take it further. I say, and when they say, how about cold, fresh, clean water? And I go, nope. And so they're stuck. And they say, well, do you like drinking water at all? Nope, I'm a camel. And you just kind of chuckle at it and say, thank you for calling. I really appreciate it. You have a good day. And they're laughing at the other end, because you just stumped them, but you did it in a way, you didn't use the pejorative no, right? You did it with a style. And that style was, you're recognizing their technique on you. And this a little bit is Deirdre's point, right? About the different personas that Voss goes through that you're going to be dealing with, right? You're going to deal with one of each one of these in some way or another. The bully, the whatever, I can't remember what they are. He doesn't even call it bully. He uses a less pejorative term, but aggressive, I think, is what he uses. But that's the point. That is what he's getting at, is use it as a technique, but you have to be subtle with it. It's not the sledgehammer. It's the no used as a scalpel to try to cut away something and change the dynamic. And this is where he says, Nahid, it starts the negotiation, meaning it gets you, it stops, and in the case of the telemarketer, it stops them and doesn't waste any more of your time, but it puts them, instead of putting you in the uncomfortable setting of saying, yeah, but I don't really have a need for water, cold. Well, I got plenty of it in my, right? You go on this, nope, right? That's the beginning. Now I have a whole chart that goes into a little more detail, but does that help a little bit?
A little bit, but I would like to add, I have no problem telling telemarketing no. And one thing that Deirdre say about the women, and I grew up in an environment that I always felt I'm equal to other guys. But in reality, when you go to the work situation, as a woman with an accent and a foreigner, they're going to put you in a different category. That's a reality, unfortunately. So saying no, when you are not at the equal level, I mean, you look at yourself as an equal, but the other person doesn't look at you as an equal. Unfortunately, these are reality. And it doesn't stop me to say no, but I have to be more careful and articulate when I'm saying no. especially when there is a supervisor and you know more than the other guy, or maybe you don't, but at the same time, you are not at the equal level based on their view, not based on my view. And so what do you do in this situation? Because if you say no in that situation, they're saying she's negative. They can label you. And I think each situation might be different. That's the way I look at it. And maybe I have to learn more about this. I have to read the book. Actually, I will, but has been my experience and learning to see more diplomatic, saying no, but the best way I know how.
So and notice how near the end here, it's mastering the use of the word no and its variance, right? And I think that's what you're driving at, that he's using the term no to mean a category of things, not yes or maybe, but no. Meaning I don't know how to do that. I don't have the resources to do that. I don't have the ability to achieve that. That's a no. Or there are other variations of that. And notice how when he's in the negotiation, he doesn't even say that. He turns it around the other way and says, how do you envision me doing that? That's a no.
Yeah.
Not a yes. A yes might be, give me some time, right? Which usually is my reaction. Let me think about it, right? So it's a very subtle, we're talking about somebody that in Chris Voss that is incredibly smart and a very subtle mind. Now, you might not think that when you see his background, but there are a number of people that have backgrounds like this where they are, I'm not even going to use the term we use for them, but they appear to be sledgehammers when they're really scalpels. But they have a background of having jobs as sledgehammers. But the reason they became so expert is because they're really a scalpel at heart. And my experience is people that do this kind of thing at the incredibly high end, they're not sledgehammers, they're scalpels. And this is where it's not to say to you, Naheed, I'm going to write no on a big whiteboard and put it above your desk. I might do that, but I might say, I'm not telling you to say no. I'm saying the variants that match, that fit your approach. I believe that's what he's getting at here. And I know Amit has his hand up because he reacted to this. He's probably got some good thoughts.
May I think just a comment before, yes, now I can see master use of word no. So this is, I have to learn.
Right.
So I'm going to
stop.
It's
variance. And that's what he means about master as opposed to just use it, learn to use it. No. Master its use and the concept of no, rather than people like you and me. Deirdre's this way, Jake's this way. I sense that Ostap, you're this way. I know Amita's this way. And I know Subu's this way, right? I know you all well enough that you're coming at, and Cheryl, I didn't mean to leave you out, but in the list. But I think it's people like us that this seems like a foreign thing, like we shouldn't be doing this, right? It's the base ought to be the yes, not the no. And he's saying, look, when you're trying to change a communication from not communicating and being friends and being colleagues or being family or being helpful, you're trying to be you need results. You need results. For some reason, you need results. When that happens, move to the other side and use it in your way to help you shape. But I think the overlying thing is you have to be yourself, right? But it's employing this tactic because many of us come from cultures. You definitely come from a culture, very sophisticated original culture, right? It goes way beyond mine, right? In Scotland, we didn't originate. And the point is that you all come from a very sophisticated, a very collaborative culture, and that doesn't make for the no, right? As the first place. And as like you said, you also are dealing with the cultural issue of a woman in Western society, and that makes it even worse. Not just Western society, many societies makes it even worse, right? Am I catching that right? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And excellent. Thank you.
And we'll go further because there's a whole page of the no here, but Amit has his hand up.
Just 2 points, actually. It's funny because I use this. No, I believe is a situational word based on situation, but definitely avoid during a negotiation, because the minute you use, no is such a hard stance that the opposing person will be like, oh, wait a minute, they don't even want to discuss this. Just saying no. And that's, that just puts up all kinds of walls. But I use this, and I learned this from one of the guys who reports to me, and I'm learning from my team every day for the last 10 years. I started using this, and I use my foreign nationality to my advantage. Sometimes when I see that the conversation, I'm speaking, and I realize that people are either not understanding or I'm not penetrating through them. I say, listen, English is not my first language, so please pardon me. And they just crack up, and it lightens the room, right? And then we reset the conversation and go back to it again. So everything that I've just said, I experienced that they discard it because of that line. English is not my first language. And I can say that because I'm Indian, I'm from India, and it works pretty good for me. So I use little of these things to my advantage when I can.
And if you go back to Chris Voss, that's an accusation audit, because Amit is picking up that there may be something in the underlying situation. So he's creating an accusation audit. But notice what he did. He did it with a bit of humor. And that's my point about, if you're going to use no, I think, to Amit's point, you can use it, but if you do, make sure you have the proper tone that matches, that elicits a result, not something that's going to shut things down, but something that will continue them going. And Voss actually talks about that, because it's what you're seeking ultimately is them to come all the way around to say yes to what you would like them to do, right? But that's why I'm saying all the messages are here. And what Deirdre said to me was really powerful. And I know you all are going to say, well, okay, well, what else does she say, right? But she said, remember, this had to have been written by a co-author. And it's probably taking Voss's concepts and putting them down. It's a good co-author, by the way, because it's entertaining and it's all there. It really is all there, but it takes work to get it out. And Naheed, especially when you get into no and beyond. So it's like, it gets into like chapter 4 and beyond is where you'll really want to, because at this point, summarizing, paraphrasing, this is all stuff we've been taught all along. But when you get into this subtle point about the use of the word no and its variance, and then there's an interesting point that he makes here. Oh, Amit, I think I only gave you time for the one thought that you had.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll lower my hand. I was done. Thank you so much.
Yeah, all right. So there's a point he makes about, and we've used this, some of us have used this, we use it in our daily work, right? When you say to someone, especially the final one there, and most of you all have kids, many of you do, or you are, aunt or uncle to somebody, and the child is at the playground and they won't quit. And you say, either you come with me now or I'm leaving. And you start walking off the playground and you've got a smile on your face and they come running. No, wait. It's what you're looking to is for them to say no, because you're now leveling the playing field. And that's that's the concept. And he says, you know, that one of the ways, if you're really frustrated and you're in the middle of a business situation and you're not getting any response from your boss, you know, by the way, I don't think he means for you, you should write an email that says, have you given up on this, right? It's more the tone that and it's eliciting so that when they read it, they come away with not a positive, not, you know, have you had time to spend time on this and think about it? It's more the feeling of, no, you've already made your decision. I know my default, Naheed, would be to write that first email. You know, have you had time to think about this yet? When you told me you were going to make the decision last Monday, but it's now a week later, right? But if you really get frustrated, one of the ways to make sure that somebody pays attention is to elicit that no response from them. If they care, they may not care. And if they don't care, then that tells you something right there. Because I know in a situation I'm dealing with, I've got somebody who has failed to answer me about something, and I actually just don't think they care. And I think I already know they don't care, because I think they have a preconceived idea of the situation. And you know what? It's not valuable enough to me that I'm going to waste my time trying to explain it to them. Because if they can't see it, the rest of it doesn't matter. So anyway, I think, again, it's a very subtle use. And here's more. So it's that point where the underlying thought, Naheed, is that you and I are talking about is we start with the idea we're trying to get the other person to say yes. And his point is, look, stop seeking that. And stop thinking of no as a failure if you can use it in the right way. Because failure means you've stopped the discussion or you've shut things down. And I know that telemarketer. I know that they're going to keep asking questions. So I know what I'm doing is I'm throwing a roadblock in place, not letting them go. And so I'm strategically using that no with a little bit of humor to throw the discussion off and put me in charge of the discussion. And I've taken a third of the time to do it than if I let them keep going by saying maybe, yeah, usually, but. And the point is that it is a point that yes is the final goal you're seeking. But if you can get them to say no, they feel like they're in a good place, because that stops things and puts them in charge. Think about that telemarketer. By me doing that, I felt secure in me saying it, right? I don't feel that uncomfortable feeling of, what do I say now? How do I be polite, right? And I know, Jake, you are one of the most polite people I know, and one of the kindest, gentlest people I know. And I mean that in a very positive way. This has got to be something that resonates with you. Because
absolutely. Yeah, I'm thinking of all the examples in my head as you're sharing this with us. It's definitely against kind of the my culture, I guess. The Asian culture also, like and I think there's a lot more subtlety in Asian culture than in Western culture, right? Like in negotiation, here you expect to throw out ideas, I think, and find something that you like, what you want, or what works for me, and then what works for you, and then we agree on something in the middle. I think in Korea it's more like I predict what you want, and if it's something below your like threshold, you get offended, right? And vice versa. So it's really like and I think there's an element of kind of like respect that goes into it, right? Like in the Korean culture, it's if you throw something that's like too below the threshold, it's disrespectful. right? So this is a interesting concept, but reframing the power of no as you like allowing the other party to feel secure in their position. That's really powerful. Yeah.
And it's not easy, and that's why I say it takes. I think this can't be done by simple ways of thinking, and it can't be done with people that don't have the horsepower to deal with it. When you're trying to do all this, but notice the second from the end, negotiate in their world.
Mhm.
And so, Jake, if you're negotiating against somebody in the West, it's their world, not yours. But your point is, look, in Korea, and I'm saying, yeah, I mean, nobody knows it better than you do. So then I'd be very careful that you use no in the context of the Korean worldview.
Mhm.
But,
Mhm.
but remember what he's doing. He's dealing with people from all different cultures, all the way from when he started in the Red Army in Germany to, people around the world that were doing this stuff. So they all have different worldviews, and it's knowing that worldview and figuring that's why we see so many military people at the very highest level have doctorates from Princeton or Harvard or Columbia in foreign affairs, because they learn the cultures,
Mhm.
because they have to understand the cultures around the world on what are the differences and how do I read them, right? And I saw where somebody recently took apart the Iranian culture, and it is not a hammer culture, right? It is a um, scalpel culture. And now we may disagree with how that scalpel is used, but the thinking is very deep. It very much the Asian cultures, and very much the same with the East Asian cultures are very thoughtful, deep, strategic thinking, and their history goes way back further than our culture does, right? Because we're just derivatives of the culture. And understanding that, and what is it representing, and how much of that culture is coming out in that individual that you're dealing with. You all wouldn't know this, but you have to be multilingual to be in many of our very, very, very sharp-edged special forces. You have to have at least one language beyond your native language, because you don't compete, because you have to understand the language of the ground that you're on. And so that's the point behind this concept of no, Nahid. It's how do you frame it in those contexts that you're trying to elicit them saying no to, that puts them on a position of feeling more comfortable, because they're trying to get you to say yes, right? And they think they're grounded, but by you turning it around and now putting them in a position where you basically, after I say I'm a camel, and I say to the telemarketer, well, are you trying to sell water to a camel? Right? And they're going, no. And I mean, do you see what I mean? That changes the whole dynamic of the conversation, because I had them confused as the daylights. But the moment I said, are you trying to sell water to a camel? And they go, no. But notice how even the inflection of my voice changed from, instead of being, I kind of settled, right? Does that start to, by the way, I'm not trying to say now take and apply it, because this is where we might understand something, but we haven't figured out how we use it. But does that help understand what he's driving at?
Absolutely, to me.
So, I mean, I know that it's worth, I promise you that I would not, and Deirdre would not, we would not suggest that you study this topic, or that we'd even take a workshop to try to say, all right, let's each one of us take a different role here. I'm going to take a different cultural role, And I'm going to be the one side, you're the other. You have a different culture. Let's see if we can manage and use these techniques and see if we can learn how this stuff works, right? Because I think it's worthy of that. I really do, so that we can at least start to learn how we might be able to use it ourselves in varying situations and improve our ability to achieve better results, right? Because we have people like, Jake and others who are trying to raise money for their businesses. And they're raising money for people that are different cultures and they have a different view of the world. And I think that without being sophisticated, and I only use Jake because we're helping him, without using these kind of techniques, you may not get to the answer you want. You may get to the one brown shoe, one black shoe answer, as opposed to the answer that properly fits, like Amit was talking about. And I know, Subbu, you had your hand up. Do you still want to make a comment?
No, I was kind of giving thumbs up for doing the role play that you're mentioning. So it was more like an emotion.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
thumbs up, yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait. I really would like to say I'm going to take on a couple of different roles and see how well I can do in those roles using that ability, because I know some of you know my son. He mastered this technique, and that's what he does now. He does a lot of negotiation of financial deals for portfolio companies. He loves it. And I saw him negotiate when he was 24 years old after having really studied hard Voss, because somehow he got excited about Voss when he was very young. And he walked away with this beautiful used car that I would never, ever have gotten for the price that he got and the conditions. And he's still friends with the people that sold it to him. I mean, and here I thought it was buying his first car, right? That he was going to get taken to the cleaners. And he goes, Dad, really, you got to let me do this. And, okay, whatever, right? I mean, those of you that know him, you know that he would say that to me too.
Yeah. I think, yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
I think the course that I was saying, the negotiation coursework I took at Columbia, right? So it was like part of negotiation and conflict management program, and I took it in the summer when I did the program, and it was like the entire summer course was full of role plays. I was trying to go back into my notes and see what other example role plays, and I literally enjoyed every minute of the role play, sitting with like 8 to 10 classmates, like doing different role plays of like likewise, as you said, the culture is one example, and there's a different like how you go and talk about negotiation at work, negotiation at buying a used car at a showroom, negotiation at like this, and then take different examples and kind of convince the other person, understand where they are coming from, and those kind of things. Like it was really fun doing those role plays. I think can't wait to do something similar at some capacity where we can do some role plays.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. Amit.
I just had to put my hand up the minute I heard Jake say disrespectful and stuff. And I come from a culture in India where I grew up. The culture out there, it's very I can't seem to find the word, but it's very sad, I guess, that they respect the person for the money the person has and the position the person holds. And when you're speaking to someone with a lot of money and quote unquote power, they expect you to speak with a softer tone because you don't want to hurt their bruise their ego. You don't want to be disrespectful. And that's a classic technique in negotiation where the opposition, once they realize that about you, they can throw out certain words that just sizzles you. And that's it. Once they've got you sizzled, they've got you pretty good. And in order to avoid that, and it's still a daily learning process for me, it is unwinding everything I have learned from being as a child. It's having a lot of humility. So in my experience is the higher you go in life, or the C-level or the executive VP or what have you, I usually see two kinds of people. One with the higher they go, the greater the humility that they gain. Or on the other side, the higher they go, the more intense their ego becomes. And what I have learned for me, and it's a daily process for me as an individual, is not to take it personally. Because I come with so much of quote unquote baggage from my culture that when I hear certain keywords and certain terms and certain tones and the way people speak, that subconscious part of me just comes out and I react. And I learn every day now not to react, but to respond. And in order to do that, I have to shut the hell up and just listen. And it's a process. It's a daily process. But the way what helps me is in the position that I am now at my company is going with the facts, follow the data, put the facts on the table. Yes, emotions are always high in a negotiation, in a crisis situation, in what have you. Let's just stick to the facts and let's work our way to the solution from there. Because then that really neutralizes the situation and nobody can play those quote unquote dirty tricks on you. Facts are facts are facts. You cannot mess with the facts and you just go from there. That's helped me, and I'm still learning about myself every day and unwinding things that I think need to improve. But it's working on yourself at the end.
Spot
So
on.
go ahead, please.
Sorry, spot on, Amit. I think I can't relate to you more than anything. Like every word you said, like literally, I was talking to Jinhee and like Firoz, and especially I told her exactly the same. In India, we have been used to this culture of not just like people, like even for the teachers and professors and everyone at hierarchy, we won't raise our voice, or even like even if you want to express our views, we go with such a level of uh, I don't know, we call it humility or subtleness, whatever. We, we won't raise our voice to anyone at a higher level of power, be it like teacher or be it like someone at work or whoever it is, and that gives at times a kind of a challenging perception at I mean position at work where we are the receiving side, dealing with this emotion of. Especially, I have seen it myself, and I'm still learning on how to do it, because at times when someone comes after you, that throws me off. Even if I don't react or respond personally on an emotional level, it hurts internally, and I have to tell myself, okay, let me come out of it consciously, because that person is trying to be on one-on-one. It's not personal. I have to tell it every time I get that push, and that really sets the tone for the conversation to come afterwards. I can
Next
agree.
time, Subbu, just either text me or call me and we can chat.
I just want to add, final thing. I also couldn't agree more with what you just said. Because I noticed it's actually, I feel like I'm more westernized in a sense. And but when I go talk to like Korean investors, for instance, like I have to switch modes, right? In my conversation style. And I think that like what you just said, Subu, like and what Amit mentioned, it kind of like triggers you into that like mode of like extra careful, like like not to like uh state things too straightforward, right? And it's hard for me to switch back, right? So I've been kind of avoiding meeting Korean investors because it's so hard for me to make that switch back. Uh, I,
You
I
know,
I almost felt like it negatively impacts my mind space.
when I was doing the course, and I think all of us must have read this book, I have to go find it. There was different personalities that they had outlined in this book as part of our course material. And the highest grade of achieving is the alchemist. And that stuck with me because you're basically like a not a chameleon, but you're like water. You're absorbing everything and anything, and you're not changing your true self.
Mhm.
That's the real alchemist, where they can situate themselves to any situation and not be affected by the situation. They know who they are, what they are, and they stay really calm at any given point. That's like nirvana. You reach the ultimate goal when you become the quote unquote alchemist. And if I find the book, it's probably in my library. I have to go look through it. I'll put it in an email, and it was part of our course material. And there were all these different personality traits, and the alchemist was what you aspire to become.
Oh yeah, I think I
And it's a
remember that.
journey. It doesn't happen in one day. It's like a symphony. It's a journey. It takes for some people it takes months, for some people it takes years, and some it takes decades.
May I add a comment to Amit? I agree with the alchemist that excellent comment, but you need to know the culture of the different people so you understand in different situations you act properly. That's the way I look at it, because if you are not familiar with the culture, you cannot be successful. That's the way I believe it works, but I'm open.
I think, I mean, again, if you think about what Voss is saying here, negotiate in their world, right? So Jake, one of the ways that, and again, this is just opinion of one, but one of the ways we dealt with it in the past, or I've dealt with it in the past, I have a different presentation, completely different presentation, so that it puts me in a different frame of mind. And that's how I had multiple versions of the presentation I did based on the kind of investor I was going to. And that, but I think Amit's point and Nahid's point is a really good one. It's almost as if, and I know this, you don't need another challenge in your life, but it's almost like you say to yourself, there's a challenge here. And I am going to learn how to negotiate in their world, not mine. And that's the whole thing that what Voss is trying to get across to us is that lift the whole thing up one level. And to Amit's point, you know who you are, and you know what you are, and be solid in that, but lift it up a level. You know, one of the sayings that I love, and many of you have heard me say it before, a friend of ours says this, and he's Colombian. He says, I may speak with an accent, I don't think with an accent. And that is and he says in a very humorous way, at the right time, to do exactly what Amit was saying, to diffuse that, but also to put the other side on. It's that accusation on it again. It's seeing that has something to do with, where it appears to have something to do with a conversation. So I'm going to bring it out into the open and make it clear that that's not really the case. And I think that, again, if you can figure these things out and you can change that conversation to more of a subtle point here, I think you're getting the essence. And this is why I say the Voss book is really deceiving. It's big type, it's very airy, very well written. It's all there, but it takes work on your part to say, all right, now what is this really telling me? You know, he goes on to talk about you know, what you're trying to do is to get them to be the one that is responding in positive ways. So instead of them saying you are right, it's that's right. And the subtlety is, it's not, because when I say that's right, it's how I see it. When I say you're right, there's a qualifier that's got an aspect of how you see the situation, but maybe you don't see it exactly like I see it, right? There's that qualification. It's that maybe, but what you're looking for is that I am acknowledging that is exactly the situation. That's what he's saying. You have to get to that point, because it's only then. And then he talks about how do you get there? And he talks about the next two things, or the next three things, actually. It's that, how do I reframe everything? Because that's what this is all about in Heat. It's reframing everything, because when it starts out, it's the other side usually, especially for people like us, that is framing that discussion. And we're very uncomfortable walking in the room and trying to frame it right away. And there are people that do that, right? That just walk in and it's that that aggressive approach. We're not comfortable doing that. So we're walking into a such situation that has already been framed by somebody else, and we're letting them frame it. How do you reframe it? And he uses what he calls calibrated questions, meaning it's this thoughtful questioning that you're looking for what that other side is signaling to you. And what you're ultimately trying to do with those questions is to make sure that whatever you agree to will in fact be done. That's what key idea 8 is. That you're looking to make sure that the way you construct that new framing, whatever kind of result you've got, they can do. And so it's all about figuring out who is really in control, and is the person you're talking to in control. And he'll even tell you the bulk of the time when somebody's telling you they're not in control, there's somebody else, there really isn't. But when they're claiming they're in control, they're not. And so and he has plenty of examples that make it very clear. And then he says, once you've gotten to that point, then you can do the old-fashioned haggling to get to the final result. And he has ways that you do that, techniques, just like we've talked about, that make perfectly good sense that we would normally be employing early. And his point is, no. Reframe the whole thing first. Get it to where you like it. And you know, the point Deirdre was making to me is he was doing this when he's got people being held hostage. So he was taking whatever time. Now, he will tell you that constantly you're getting threatened by the other side. And he said when his gauge for the significance of the threat is when they're very clear about who, what, when, and how. And he said the more clear they are, the more clear they are about one or more of those questions, you're reaching higher levels of threat that things will break apart, because everyone likes to keep things as fluid as they can. They don't want to become specific. But he said when they start getting very clear about those 4 questions, or the bulk of those questions, who, what, when, and how, that's when you start to need to think about, okay, am I spending too much time? Am I pushing in the wrong direction? Am I taking the wrong approach? And that's what idea 9 is. And then idea 10 is something that Deirdre is probably has a better way of describing than I do. So I'm going to let her take a moment and describe number 10.
Well, actually, the example in the book is reasonably good. It was a hostage situation in a bank. Someone walked in and took a number of hostages, and the negotiators, led by Voss, assumed that this would be a typical bank hostage situation. What they did not know is that the hostage taker wanted to commit suicide by cop. That was a key piece of information that he did not expect to walk out of there alive. He didn't care about walking out of there alive. He wanted to do something so that the policemen surrounding the bank would kill him. This is where he talks about the unknown unknowns. Now, I don't know how many of you remember the US Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, who was talking about there are known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and then unknown unknowns. And he actually was ridiculed by the media for going into that. But Voss is saying, no, this is actually critically important for you to understand, is this a known known? Too many of us assume that they're known knowns. You can't assume any of that in these sorts of situations, or not just a hostage situation, any negotiation. You need to start to figure out what's known, what's unknown, so that you can figure out where the other side is coming from. And then it may not be possible to get to the bottom unless you have the time to ask your questions and to figure out what's going on. In the situation in the book, which is tragic, he actually killed one of the hostages and then stood up and of course was shot immediately. it was an unknown that he wanted to be shot. And there was nothing probably that could have been done about it because there was no time to get to the bottom. But I think his point is always anticipate in a difficult negotiation, if you don't feel you're getting anywhere, that there's something key missing. And this is where you use the calibrated questions to dig further, to try to find out more about what's really going on here in the situation.
So, as I mentioned, I think there's a lot of substance here. And this is a case of how do you take this and what can you do to improve your approach to the world, right? So this is his quote that we started with. No is a dynamic you have to master. So there's the point, Nahid. It's a dynamic, not a word. It's a dynamic before you can master yes. And you think when you see this initially, it sounds interesting and it sounds like, but now that you understand his way of thinking, you say, okay, I get what you're saying. I really do. As we said, we're going to have a negotiation intensive this summer, and I'll send something out and we'll schedule it and do this. But I think this will be incredibly helpful. And also, I think it'll be fun, as Subbu said. We also have part 2 of the AI use case discussion on Wednesday, June the 5th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time to accommodate the world. And we hope you all will find the time and the interest and the enthusiasm to join us. And as usual, thank you all so much. And for those of you that weren't here, that are watching this remotely, we wish you were, because we know you would have had interesting things to add to all this today. So any closing thoughts from any of you all before we give the final words to our friend, Professor Silberstein? Thank you all again so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy the holiday next week if you get to observe it on Monday. And please stay safe and healthy. And with that, I'll let Deirdre have a final word.
I do want to, my final word is it's a fascinating topic, and obviously we all need the negotiation intensive here. But Subbu made a comment, he referred to the book Getting to Yes. You've got to read the Voss book because he comments on the various techniques set out in different books and positions them for you. His comment about getting to yes may work in some situations, but not for anything that involves anything hostage, anything police, anything deep, anything where there are hidden motivations. There's an assumption of how the two people are negotiating and getting to yes. It's almost an academic assumption of that they're going to be working at this level. But in other situations, particularly where there are unknowns, you can't do that sort of thing. So it could be a very valuable book. I'm not saying don't read it and don't like the book, but read Voss's comments about that book and other books to position what he's teaching and position what you've already learned about negotiation. And with that, I will just join in with Professor Cowan and say, wish you good rest of the weekend, good Memorial Day weekend, and we'll be seeing some of you fairly soon in upcoming sessions.
Yes. Bye all.
Okay.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.